still kind of sorting things out, thinking about it, but yeah. Emeritus.
Yeah. Oh, yes, very awesome.
Yeah, and so
yeah, try it. Tell like, oh, I tried it. It's not good. Not
no, there comes a time.
sure. Yeah, we're going to try it. Yeah. Lots of get done.
Anyway, so I don't know.
What would you press that's different? So you press it and hold it, and then you press it again.
Aye. It's beautiful. It's wonderful.
You can pick out pills. I mean, it doesn't take
Oh
much
yes,
to
oh
figure
yes.
out, like, yeah.
No, but I only got snippets, but I'm gonna get more. Thank you very
Of
much.
course. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I'm Mimi Coulter. I'm the Vice Provost and University Librarian here at WashU. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the William H. Gass Centenary Celebration. Thank you for joining us, whether you're here in person or whether you're joining us online, as we honor the legacy of one of our most venerable WashU community members over the past 60-plus years. To help us do this, we have former students, colleagues, and friends all with us today, and I really look forward to hearing their stories of Gass's lasting influence on their lives and their careers. The WashU Libraries is proud to have the William H. Gass papers in its modern literature collection, and we are also grateful for the longtime support that he gave us, which even preceded his time at WashU. I also very much want to thank his widow, Mary Gass, for continuing that support, and also very much for helping make this occasion possible. Thanks also go to Jacqueline Halaz from WashU Advancement, who was very involved in making this happen, so thanks very much. And really to all of our whole events team. That it does take a fair amount of work to put a program like this together, and I appreciate the efforts that everyone has made. Okay, so the program today is just one of the ways that we are celebrating GAS this year and really beyond this year. Another bit of celebration that I'm excited about is the exhibits that we have available. There are actually two. The first, a traditional one, William H. Gass, 50 New Acquisitions, is currently on display in Olin Library. It'll be there until January 31st. You will find it in the foyer around the grand staircase and also inside the Special Collections Reading Room, which is on the first floor. I encourage you to go over and have a look. Then we have a separate but certainly related digital exhibit that is available online. It is entitled William H. Gass, The Soul Inside the Sentence. It's a life-spanning exhibit of Gass's work. It was actually first launched in 2013, but it's been updated and enhanced for the occasion of the Centenary, and it includes digitized versions of many of the materials that you will see in the physical exhibit that's currently in Olin. So I'm excited about that. We have some celebratory giveaways at the information table. If you haven't got one already, you'll find a beautiful new postcard with a QR code for Soul Inside the Sentence to help you find it. We also have a really stunning new Gass broadside that was a collaboration between the libraries and the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Art. And we have a limited number of copies of an illustrated catalog that Gass wrote for an exhibit that he curated in Special Collections to inaugurate the Writer Center in 1991. It is very much a collector's item, so get back there and get your copy. And so lastly, as part of our centenary celebration, we are inviting alumni and others who have memories of Gass to submit those memories to us using an online form that you can access from the event page on the library's website. There's also a QR code at the information table to direct you to it. We're really looking forward to, we're hoping to receive your input so that we can include some of these excerpts from some of these reflections online. We really want to be able to continue to attest to Gass's lasting impact on WashU, on St. Louis, really beyond that, even after the centenary year is over. So please do take some time to contribute your memories. With that, it is my role to introduce Ted Morrissey, who's going to be moderating our first panel. Ted is an accomplished fiction writer and a lecturer at Lindenwood University's MFA in Writing program. For the past 15 years, his primary scholarly interest has been in Gass. He's studied and promoted Gass's work through articles, conference papers, scholarly monographs, and The Tunnel at 25, an online symposium. And he is currently editing William H. Gass at 100 essays. So please join me in welcoming Ted and our panel of speakers.
Well, thank you for that introduction and also for the honor of chairing this panel, moderating this panel. You'll have to forgive us. This is our first time through an unrehearsed panel, so we'll do our best here for you. But also let me just thank Joel and the Special Collections folk, as I always try to do when I can, because they just do an excellent job, as you all know, and the support of me and other scholars across a wide range of interests is just pretty amazing. I've never had an opportunity that I didn't need some help, and they were right there to give assistance and so forth, so I really appreciate that. So we're going to kind of just stick with the program here. We have three accomplished panelists here, and we're just going to kind of go in order. And when we go in order, they're going to go to the microphone there at the lectern and kind of give a few prepared remarks. And then after all three are done, come back here, I suspect, to the table and have a little bit of an informal discussion. Meanwhile, we want to make sure that we have a little bit of time at the end for you to ask some questions. So kind of be thinking about that perhaps as they deliver their remarks and so on. So without further ado, let me begin to introduce them. I'll just give a few bits of their bio before they speak, and then I'll do that before each one. So our first speaker is going to be Patrick Davis. Patrick is the founder, publisher, and editor-in-chief of Unbound Edition Press. He also publishes the literary journal Revel, which he seems to have brought a couple copies of, which is cool. Mr. Davis is a lifetime voting member of the National Book Critics Circle. He writes poetry, essays, literary criticism, and reviews. And he was generously mentored by William Gass during his graduate studies at WashU from 1990 to 1997. So if you would, please help me welcome Mr. Patrick Davis.
Or artifacts, whichever you might prefer to call them. In Bill's and Gertrude Stein's honor, some tender buttons that contain some things that Bill was kind enough to say to me in the years I got to spend working with him. A lot, of course, has changed at WashU since the early and mid-90s. When I was last here, the great Carl Phillips was just arriving. Stephen Meyer had published his magnificent volume on Stein. Naomi Lebowitz was teaching with the inimitable passion that only Naomi can teach with. Stanley Elkin was still writing. Howard Nemiroff was still with us. And so we get to remember the great influences on our life together. And that seems to me what's so meaningful about being here together today. And I'm incredibly honored to be included. The lens that focused my literary life came before my eyes on Thursday, January 23rd, 1986. It was around 1:30 p.m. I remember this with such specificity because of the profound impact a single sentence had on me. I was taking an undergraduate course at Stetson University, taught by a deeply intelligent, kind, and giving professor named Michael Raymond. It was called From Story to Anti-Story. He had assigned In the Heart of the Country by William H. Gass. It was in that story where I read, "It's true. There are moments, foolish moments, ecstasy on a tree stump, when I'm all but gone. Scattered, I like to think like seed, for I'm the sort now in the fool's position of having love left over, which I'd like to lose. What good is it now to me? Candy, ungiven after Halloween." If that's what language could do, then I was all in. I changed my major to English that afternoon. I was a misguided economics major. It was the 80s after all. I wrote my undergraduate thesis on the influence of M.H. Abrams on Gass's work. I had no idea until much later that Abrams had himself guided Gass through his own dissertation. And I should say, I think the way Abrams taught Bill to read is ultimately what Bill taught me, was how to read, that everything has some reference and you must go to the source. And then I set my sights on Washington University. A single sentence had redirected my life. It would not be the last time. One of the glorious challenges of Bill's work is that it is inexhaustibly quotable. Every sentence is special, made so by the love of language he gave to each one that he wrote. I will quote from him today, but not from his texts, rather from things he said to me that continue to shape me and might be a balm to you today in these frightening times. These are the quotes that are on the buttons. During graduate school here, a period marked by Bill's extraordinary generosity toward me and the English department's ceaseless patience with my feeble attempts at scholarship, he said to me, "The suffering is the point. If you are willing to suffer for an idea, you can prevent terrible things from happening in the world." But I'd had enough of suffering, and instead I prostituted what talent I had as a hired pen, as a consultant to major publishing houses for 25 years. I became, at best, literary adjacent. Then I had the most profound of breakdowns across the board in every way. My health and my mind collapsed from deep exhaustion and from ignoring the truth of my own literary life. To recover, I returned to the source, Bill's sentences. In 2017, as I was barely hanging on to life, just as Bill was starting to let go, I picked up Middle C, his last novel. Gertrude Stein had taught us loving repeating, and it was Gass's repetitions of a single sentence in his final book that saved my life. I could hear the rhythm of love repeatedly applied on the page again. I was returned to the focused, arresting moment in 1986 from in the heart of the country. I had found my center, my middle, my life's sentences again. In reflecting on the books I had read, I thought of Bill's early publishers, David Godine, Dalkey Archive, Conjunctions, of course, and others who saw serious literature as worthwhile, who put art above mere commerce. I decided to start Unbound Edition Press in honor of them all and what they had done to focus, shape, and save my life. Among our happiest achievements is an experimental anthology, not just an anthology of some experimental writing, exceptional as it is, but an anthology experimental in form. It is unbound, can be reordered, and appears to be a random shuffle of papers. It is not. Truth be told, it is inspired by Bill's masterpiece, The Tunnel, and contains work by him, photographs, lecture notes, tucked inside. His views of the city of St. Louis frame Robert Hass's Soul Notebook, a poetic reflection upon another city. There is nothing random about the shuffle of papers here. Bill once said to me, with a blank page, everything becomes possible. This got him into some trouble with Willie Masters' Lonesome Wife at the time of its publication, but it has also inspired us in publishing our literary journal, Revel. I'm overjoyed to share that the next issue of Revel, Revel 3, there go my buttons. This is Revel 1 and 2. Revel 3 will contain transcripts from this centenary celebration and previously unpublished fiction by William H. Gass. I would like to share also that all of our books, the anthology, Revel, our other titles, are all designed right here in University City by the brilliant designers Eleanor Safe and Joseph Floresco. It is my dream, and just that one day we might be able to design and publish a true author's edition of The Tunnel on its 35th anniversary, bringing all of Bill's design notes for the book to life. With a blank page, everything is possible. Who knows, but we can dream. I would like to conclude with a bit of the introduction to The Experiment Will Not Be Bound, and a story about Bill included in it. It is also very much worth noting that the anthology contains a beautiful foreword called Time is an Author, along with photographs by Bill's daughter, Catherine Gass. No text is sacred, but every writer is. On a brightly cold April morning in 1995, I walked with William H. Gass across the front quad spreading wide just inside the archway at Washington University in St. Louis. I asked him how he was doing after referencing Robert Alter's particularly brutal review of The Tunnel that had just been published in the New Republic. It read, "Some may seize on it as a postmodern masterpiece, but it is a bloated monster of a book. The bloat is a consequence of sheer adipose verbosity and an unremitting condition of moral and intellectual flatulence. Gass's real achievement is to have produced a complete compendium of the vices of postmodern writing." "Oh, I am great," Gass replied to me. "You must remember it's very important to be hated by the right people." That's one of the buttons. In that moment, I understood the strength and depth of my mentor's literary character, the titanium rod of an intellectual backbone that held tall his philosophy of aesthetics. And I also understood Alter's failing as a critic in this instance. He had missed entirely the flatulent puns on Gass's own name, the universal intestinal tunnel running ripe and rancid through the heart of every human being, the anal-centric imagery of the insignia worn by with pride by the party of the disappointed people and their assholes. As imagined by Gass's narrator, William Kohler, Alter missed the self-awareness and intentionality of the tunnel and its author alike. In short, Alter missed the book. Life is shit. The best any human can do is to make bearable through art, through experimenting with the creation of meaning where none exists. Should that fail, the only choice remaining is to dig one's own grave or dig a way through, to tunnel out. This reminds me of a particular moment in class I think you'll probably hear again and again, of how generous Bill was to everyone, how he made time for those of us not worthy or ready for it is beyond me, but he did. He came to a class I was teaching to undergraduates one time. We were reading On Being Blue as an example of what an essay really could be. And I was thrilled that the students would get to meet and talk with an author. And a particularly naive young woman, who let's say was still growing into her thinking, said to him, "So you're a philosopher, right?" And he said yes. And I honestly think she meant this unironically and with originality. She said, "So can you tell me what the meaning of life is?" And he kind of pivoted very decisively. I wouldn't call it a glare, but she had gotten his attention. And he said simply, "Signs have meaning. Life is not a sign. This is why we write." Still, nearly 30 years on, readers might now forgive Alter's review of Gass's masterpiece. After all, The book was not published as Gass intended, and this surely contributed to critics like Alter mistakenly reading it as a traditional book at all. The Tunnel is an experience, not a narrative. It is a shuffled stack of supposedly random pages, not a linear story. It was, and may remain, beyond readers limited by traditional notions of reading. That is understandable. The Tunnel is a profound testament to the impossibility of writing bankrupt ideas into acceptable form, to justifying the unjustifiable. It is an unyielding study of morally induced writer's block. And because The Tunnel casts history's most hideous moments in Gass's lush prose, the work also places the reader in the same sort of moral blockage. Gass balanced Kohler's writer's block with a morally induced reader's block. Is the text vile or vibrant? Can content be consumed separately from form, like the broth from a soup? How one answers reveals the character of the reader, not the writer. Was it for this, Wordsworth asks in the prelude, Western literature's other great contemplation on writer's block? Gass, a postmodernist steeped in the Romantics, answers Wordsworth's question with The Tunnel. Yes, this terrifying fallen world is all there is, and so the experiment to make it tolerable must continue. This is why writers write. Perhaps readers and some critics would have been able to understand The Tunnel more easily upon publication if the book had been brought to the reading public in the form the author intended. Form for Gass was inseparable from meaning, the way the body is inseparable from the language it produces. Gass's design notes for the Tunnel make it clear. This manuscript will naturally be manufactured and presented to the public as a book, and it will be a real book, no doubt about that, but it must not be a book symbolically. Symbolically, it is just a heap of pages on various topics with the narrator has shuffled together. This must seem to be the case, although at another level, the work is tightly organized and determined. Gass also wanted The Tunnel bound in, quote, rough black cloth. He felt too that, quote, it is important that my name appear nowhere on dust jacket or cover, and that nothing else be put on the jacket. No bio, no picture, blurb, etc. Why not put the author's name on the book? Because it is Kohler's book, because in a sense, it is not a book, because in the reality of the novel itself is dispersed between the pages of another book. In a 2019 article titled "A 1995 Novel Predicted Trump's America," Alec Navala Lee wrote in the New York Times that even under the best of circumstance, this plotless book of over 600 pages, The Tunnel, would have been one of the least commercially viable novels ever released by a major publishing house. And it had the additional misfortune of appearing halfway through a decade that was uniquely unprepared for its despairing vision of America. Gass, far ahead of his time in predicting the rise of American fascism, had to concede some of his design vision for The Tunnel to the commercial interests of his publisher. Gass was ahead of his time too in his unrelenting support for Salman Rushdie, risking his own safety on a highly secretive trip to visit the targeted author in 1992. He returned from the trip to Boulder, Colorado, with a plan to hand make and distribute buttons reading, "I am Salman Rushdie," to authors far and wide. Commercialism was never his interest. lifting and protecting international writers was. And in this anthology, there is reproduced the original I Am Salman Rushdie button, which Catherine remembers Bill making by hand with a little button maker. While the experiment will not be bound as no pastiche of the tunnel, it is an homage to its bold experimental vision and to William H. Gass's support of daring writers. Likewise, it is an homage to every writer who believes the experiment of writing, of books, of making and unmaking and remaking meaning must continue, one sentence, one line at a time. Some of those are included in this seemingly random heap of shuffled papers contained in rough black cloth. There is no name or title on this anthology in honor of Bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Our next panelist is Michelle Comi. Michelle is publisher for art and architecture at Princeton University Press, where she has worked since 2014. She previously worked in acquisitions at Yale University Press for 13 years. She holds a BA and a BFA from Washington University.
There are a lot of tender buttons. I had the great privilege of working with Bill Gass and Lauren Cuoco at the International Writers Center, which is the scholarly project that Bill turned to at WashU when he retired from teaching. And it was enmeshed in the university, but it faced outward. It addressed St. Louis and it addressed the world. I was in my early 20s when I had this job that I had for 3 years. This was my first job. And there is not a day that goes by, a week that goes by, that I don't feel and recall and feel that the resonance of that privilege. What a thing to have as one's first job, this 3-year brush with brilliance that I had on a daily basis. I graduated from Washington University in 1997. I loved my coursework, but inspiration and influence also happen in the everything else. All the conditions and connections that occur outside the classroom, in a gallery, a visitor's lecture, or a space like this one. I first encountered William Gass in the everything else when he introduced William Gaddis at a conference organized by the International Writers Center in 1994 called The Writer in Religion. I can still recall Bill's pitch-perfect recitation of Gaddis's famous line from J.R., "Merry Christmas," he threatened. But the more powerful memory is the sensation of Bill's speech, the weaving of his words as they unfurled in dense clusters and focused tunnels. I'd never heard anything like William Gass reading aloud from a text he'd written, even an introduction to a talk delivered from behind a podium. I found my way to some freelance transcription, typing up one of the conference's panel discussions from a recording, and received the rare opportunity to type Bill's spoken prose as I listened to it, over and over, setting the cassette player to one of its slowest speeds, rewinding repeatedly to catch and correctly place all those commas. The International Writers Center was part of the culture of the university, facing outward toward the wider world, bringing many of the globe's most renowned writers to St. Louis. The fall of 1997, after I graduated, was packed with programming. The conference and exhibition, The Dual Muse, the writer as artist, the artist as writer, took place in November, bringing Derek Walcott, Brayton Breitenbach, Jennifer Bartlett, Tom Phillips, and others to campus. As Derek Walcott said, bowing his head in an auditorium in Steinberg, "When the great man calls, you come." When Bill called, or more likely wrote a letter, people came. David Foster Wallace opened that year's reading series in December to an audience of hundreds, many leaning against the walls and sitting on the floor. Despite the heat, Wallace wore his beanie and long black coat and read from a text that would appear a year and a half later in brief interviews with hideous men. I started full-time at the center in January of 1998. It was located in Clayton, in a distant hallway of the underground West Campus Conference Center, a center within another center, in the former famous bar building on Forsyth Boulevard. We shared the building solely with long-term library storage. No one ever casually wandered by. A visitor really had to know where they were going. In terms of location, the International Writers Center was to Washington University as St. Louis was to New York. It was far from the perceived center of things. I worked there until July of 2001 when Bill retired. In that time, I saw many people make their way to our basement and to Bill. His generosity was extraordinary. I don't think he ever declined a request for a conversation or interview from a visiting writer, a nervous student, or the New York Times. Together with Lauren Cuoco, the founding associate director, the center served the university and the city for a decade. In addition to its public programming, an annual reading series, 3 conferences, and the monthly St. Louis Literary Calendar, it published 5 books, one of which, Literary St. Louis, A Guide, evolved from the driving tours Bill and Lauren used to give visiting writers. It celebrated the histories of the many authors who were born here, like Samuel Clemens, Tennessee Williams, Kate Chopin, and T.S. Eliot, or who, like Bill, found their way to St. Louis and stayed. 22 students worked on the book, mostly conducting research. Several contributed to its text, including me. Now we are in the far reaches of the everything else, on the second and third steps of a path that led to my career today. WashU never promised me this, but through Bill, it delivered. I've worked in art book publishing for 23 years. Before arriving at Yale University Press, I didn't stop to earn a graduate degree. I never worked at a literary magazine or sifted through a slush pile. I never asked what an agent does. I never attended a New York book launch. I never sat down with an author to discuss their writing and how it might evolve. But I worked for Bill Gass. Those years provided so much of this training for me. Bill was a brilliant novelist and critic housed in a philosophy department who loved architecture and was a passionate photographer, lifelong pursuits shared with and inspired by Mary and Catherine. He wrote his way through, around, and among disciplinary boundaries. He found inspiration from high to low and back again in the work of Rilke, Stein, Joyce, and Flaubert, in windows, and even in the gigantic Amico sign at the corner of Skinker and Clayton. As I shape the list of titles I publish, now in the upper hundreds, I've noticed that I strongly prefer work that faces outward, that connects to other fields, that stretches the boundaries of a discipline or ignores them altogether. I have a difficult time with writerly egos or ungenerous behavior from highly esteemed people, because I know that greatness and generosity can go hand in hand, and I saw this from the very best. How much did I learn by typing Bill's longhand letters, from his questions, comments, and conversation, from attending those events and the parties that followed them at Bill's and Mary's lovely home, sitting across from Bill at welcome dinners with writers and absorbing his incredible wit, humor, and kindness, more than I can ever say. Generous in mind as well as time, Bill's interests and professional worlds expanded my own. Because of him, I learned to read the architecture of a word, a phrase, a paragraph, and a page.
Thank you, Michelle. Our final panelist here is Gerhild Williams, or the more common American pronunciation, Professor Williams. Professor Williams has published widely on German and French literature and culture from the Middle Ages to the early modern period, specializing more recently in the 16th and 17th centuries. She has been working in translation theory and practice, the early modern witch phenomenon, and the development of the novel. Her bio goes on, but she tells me one of her current projects is getting used to being a retiree. So thank you, Professor Williams.
Thank you. Thank you. It is great to be here and honor Bill for all of us. In 1986, and we heard more about that date just recently, Lynn Tadlock, my colleague and friend, and I co-organized the 8th Symposium on German Literature on the topic of literature and the cosmos. We asked Bill Gass to start us off, and starting us he did, with a sentence typical for his quirkily profound style, quote, "Let us imagine a world without language, a world," he continues, "undisturbed by anybody's elaborated longings, a world untroubled by beliefs, concerns, conjectures, dreams, a world without lies, with nothing we are willing to die for, a world which by default would be in peace," unquote. I knew William Gass as a colleague, a friend, distinguished and award-winning writer, and of course, as devoted father of Liz and Catherine, and husband of Mary, who in her own right contributed much to Bill's success as a writer and to the center's success. Bill's excellence as a writer was only exceeded by the irreverence with which he undermined authority in a language that was and is as subversive as it is complicatedly clear, shimmering with great beauty and unexpected metaphors. Authority was ever the target of his writing, whether openly denounced or quietly undermined in his words. This linguistic target practice was doubly remarkable if one considers that Bill served in the US Navy, an organization not exactly known for its tolerance of quirky linguistic disrespect. And with this, I'm already deeply into the 3 qualities, habits of mind, if you will, which I admired in Bill Gass: his linguistic brilliance, we heard about it, his courage, and his acerbic sense of humor. So let's talk regarding his linguistic brilliance and creativity. Coolly dismissive of banality to sharply disapproving of sloppiness in thought, words, and actions, Bill's intolerance of the careless use of language earned him the prize-winning admiration and envy of many, including myself. As a non-native speaker of English, my awe for Bill's way with words was boundless, as was my envy. I admire the English language and people who can work it into its most efficient, translucent, and militant beauty. I saw in Bill a most skillful, even at often lonely practitioner of its unruly splendor. In 1999, Bill published Reading Rilke, in which he translated selected works of Rainer Maria Rilke, a kindred spirit whose art celebrates the German language. He, by the way, was a poet of the mid-century, 1900s. The German language as it gives voice as much to beauty as in human suffering. Quote, "Translating," Bill wrote in the foreword to the volume, "is reading of the best, most essential kind," unquote. Bill celebrated Rilke's voice and artistry in earthy tones, quote, "The poet is pushed into a realm of forms where language glows as ghosts glow, as unsubstantial as the worm's light," unquote. To share Bill's linguistic high-wire act translating this challenging poet, I did many times ask Bill to speak to my students in my translation seminars. He always graciously agreed, describing his work with Heide Ziegler, distinguished scholar, translator, and at the time, president of the University of Stuttgart. He described how, with her support, each poem became his own without losing Rilke. Students praised their work with them as high points of my seminars. He taught them much about the challenge as well as the achievements of translating poetry, especially translating a poet such as Rilke, when approached by a magician with words such as Bill. So, talking about his courage. There was a time when hardly a committee of import or any publication showcasing Washington University would reach the public without a contribution by Bill, and I never remember Bill refusing to take on yet another task in the service of this institution. I also remember an especially challenging search committee where everyone was talking at cross purposes. We've all been part of those. Finally, Bill got up, quietly pointing to the list of names about whom we were to decide. He made clear in which direction the search was to move, and it did. Bill Gass and Lauren Coco, as director and associate director respectively, led the International Writers Center for 10 years. The original idea for the center came from Jim McLeod, with his amazing combo of brilliance and practicality. His idea in its execution was supported by then Chancellor Bill Danforth, Chancellor Mark Wrighton, Provost Ed Macias, and Executive Vice Chancellor Dick Roloff. This dynamic foursome supported Bill and Lauren, who during the decade of its existence brought everybody who was anybody in the world of writing and translating to St. Louis, to the center, and to Washington University. There were overflow readings, conferences on local and global themes, which yielded publications still very much worth reading, especially given our current interest in local and global politics. I very much encourage you to read the introduction to the collection of The Writer in Politics, which is a wild ride through the theme from Socrates to yesterday, with countless fascinating aperçus in between. In 2001, you heard it a minute ago, Bill fervently supported bringing Salman Rushdie to campus, who was then just coming out of the fatwa declared on his life. Bill's letter to the Assembly Series Committee is still inspiring reading as an indictment against letting fear rule our decisions and an equally passionate endorsement of academic freedom. Here, Bill stated firmly that, quote, nothing outweighs academic freedom. This freedom means that each of us must suffer the speech of fools, zealots, and enemies. We should do so gladly, unquote. And as a fitting comment on what we witness in our community these days, he writes, those who feel they finally hold the truth in their hands should hold it then as if grateful for its arrival, not in a frightened fist, but in an open palm. For not even a mighty gale, let alone the wind of a few words, can blow the truth away. Differences do not frighten the truly open-minded, unquote. Bill Gass' writing will never stop challenging our ways of employing words and our intention in doing so. And his were still, and still always are, magnificently on target. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Professor Williams. I do want to have an opportunity to have a little discussion up here with our panelists, and I'll, obviously, as I mentioned, any of you who have some questions, maybe we'll just spend a few minutes hopefully having a bit of a conversation here, and then make sure we save some time to have some questions from the audience. I'm not sure what time we want to for sure wrap up. I know next 4:05. Okay, thanks. So no, those were all fascinating. Joel and Ali Chetwynd and I did a panel at the American Literature Association conference in May, and Ali in particular talked about the legacy of Gass as a model for students, meaning both in terms of looking at his stories, his essays, et cetera, as models, but also looking at his essays and interviews in terms of literary theory and talking to students about that. I know in my courses, both my graduate and undergraduate courses, Gass is a sort of a specter that's always hanging around in the digital classroom, because even if he's not on the reading list, which he often is, I'm always quoting him and talking to my students about his theory about this and about that. So anyway, I'm curious if you have any thoughts about how Gass's legacy will be kind of upheld, perhaps specifically in the classroom, as both a model through his writing, but also his thoughts on literature and so on.
I think it will be challenging for a period of time. In an age of sound bites and disposable content, we are not necessarily teaching as deeply or as broadly as we could. And I think learning to read difficult texts is a gymnasium for the mind. It teaches us to have the strong muscle of critical thinking. And I think that Bill's model of reading deeply and widely and not being afraid to point to what is a worthy model might now be called elitism, but I think it matters. I think we have to be willing to separate the wheat from the chaff and call out exemplary work and study exemplary work deeply. I'm not sure that we presently have the discipline of mind to do that as a culture. So I have some worry, but I do think that, as I did, people will return to his sentences because they are a life spring.
Maybe just to make sure we get them in, does anyone in the audience have a question or two? I'll be happy to repeat them so we can get them aired here.
I would like to make a comment on something else. It was briefly mentioned in talk with my colleagues here that Bill was also really an exceptional photographer. And I had the honor of getting a photograph of his and framed it, and it's sitting right next to my fireplace at my house. And it's a photograph of a water-soaked cardboard piece. And it is just gorgeous. And it is just what he would do, looking at something that the rest of us wouldn't see, neither the beauty nor the drama in it. And he would see it, and then he worked together with Joe, what was his name, the photographer across? Eastman, yeah, he worked with John Eastman. He worked with him with Eastman's pictures and his essays, and those also are just amazing documents of Bill's eye and Bill's language and Eastman's eye and his artistry. And I think that is something that will also continue, not only influence us as we look at Bill's writing and everything, but also the way we look at St. Louis and the various parts he found in St. Louis, the beauty in the decrepitness of some of the areas that he would witness. He actually had quite a bit of guts going into areas in St. Louis that maybe many of us would just maybe be a little bit careful about. And he would be just in there and taking pictures and then presenting it, and many of them were also exhibited in the center. So that's besides his writing and everything which has been talked about eloquently, I really admired his courage in meetings, in committees, as I mentioned, everything. He was never afraid to say what not only was on his mind, but what was right on target. And that was really admirable, besides so many other things we admire about him. Thank you.
Any questions out there? Yes. Okay, thank you. Did anyone want to respond to that in any way? I mentioned this to Joel earlier in the week. I just recently got Booth Literary Journal number 19, and there's a supplement by Michael Martone in there, a memoir, and it's composed of a bunch of little vignettes, one per page, and two of the vignettes have to do with gas. One where Michael talks about driving around Indiana. He's from Fort Wayne originally, driving around Indiana looking for B. You know, he was absolutely mesmerized by In the Heart of the Country and wanted to try to track it down, and then another reference kind of later on. So I guess in a sense, from Michael's book, one gets this idea of gases almost sort of mythologizing the Midwest somewhat. And again, that sort of plays off of the idea of being somewhat left of New York, in terms of geography. So what about this idea of mythologizing the Midwest and sort of, embracing being a Midwestern author? Does anyone have any thoughts on the panel regarding that? He hopes.
I mentioned that, so this is my copy of Literary St. Louis, which is so wonderful. And this is kind of, I'm sure that Bill, you can open a page and right away you know whether it was written by Bill or not, one of the rest of us. And he also, not only did he write the biographies of some of the more prominent figures like Samuel Clemens, but he wrote the sections on the neighborhoods in St. Louis that introduced each region. And he really, really loved the lesser known figures like the newspapermen. He loved the newspapermen, William Marion Reedy, Joseph Pulitzer, and he especially loved the strangest oddball stories like Patience Worth, who was a character from a Ouija board of another writer. And this stuff just cracked him up. He would be in his office and he'd come out and he'd read something, laugh, and then go back in and probably type it up perfectly. So there are sentences in here, and this is so deeply St. Louis. It's St. Louis in ways you did not even know existed in St. Louis. I think he loved driving very esteemed people around in his tiny, what kind of car was that? It was the smallest car you've ever seen. Which was it? It was a Ford Festiva. So he would drive Mario Vargas Llosa around St. Louis and show them these, beautiful brownstones and all of the glorious red brick that is, suffuses this beautiful city. He'd take people to the Mississippi so they could put their hands in the water if they wanted to do that, and many people did. But I think this book is a really wonderful example of how much he loved this city, and I know his love of the Midwest and this region in particular also suffuses so much of his writing, his literature, and his fiction.
Yeah, I've thought about this a bit and am working on a paper about this very subject. I think certainly while his work mythologizes the Midwest, it also is not afraid of looking at the underbelly of the Midwest. There's often a dark mythology, the way Flannery O'Connor might have spoken of good country people in the South. In the heart of the country is a heartbreaking story, and we can't ignore that the tunnel explores the dark heart of America. These two books are in conversation with each other, both set in the Midwest, and the evil that might be lurking just underneath the smile or behind the white picket fence. We can't ignore stories like The Peterson Kid or Mrs. Mean. These are not celebrations of friendly Midwestern handshakes. They're the opposite. So I do think there's a mythology there, but I think maybe there's a subtext that is worth turning attention to as well.
Well, I'll just mention, kind of going outward now, obviously you mentioned your publication of The Tunnel, which is really interesting. I was contacted by someone in Greece just a couple months ago who is working on a Greek translation of Cartesian Sonata. I don't know if they're doing it on spec or with a publisher, or I'm not sure what all the mechanics are, but I had sung the praises of that collection at the panel that I mentioned earlier, and that probably is what alerted someone to my feeling about that, so they were trying to get my input on some trickier phrases. So I guess one of my hopes is that that's just one of many examples that Gass's words will continue to just keep filtering outward into other languages and other cultures and so forth. I've delivered papers in Singapore and Lisbon, and next summer I'm committed to go to Killarney, Ireland, which is, it's really, it's a big stretch for me to want to go there, but to do a paper, and maybe Lisbon again. So anyway, I'm hoping that the translation work and just the talking about Gass's work beyond the bounds of the US will continue to move forward as well. Anyone have any kind of final thoughts, either in the audience or among our panelists? Yeah, some back there.
My career started here. I didn't know it at the time, and I think one of the most important things a university can do is provide these affiliate professional experiences for students while you're here. There's so much, whether it's a magazine or as a work-study job in the library or the gallery, the publications department, so many different programs have publications, have a facet of publications work. It could be online, it could be in print, it could be digital, it doesn't really matter. But I think to get your head around that, the richness and the pace and the life cycle of a publication is really important. And it's very, very transferable and very, very applicable. So if you're working at Student Life right now, that's hugely applicable to so many other things, and you can expand it from an illustrated article to a longer piece, to a longer piece, to a book. They're very transferable skills. And I don't know, when Bill Gass set out to found the International Writers Center, I don't know if he was thinking, maybe, maybe not, I'm also going to give this generation of undergraduates, some of whom were English majors, some of whom were not, they found their way to the center down the hallways, this extraordinary experience by pulling them into my professional life. And we're getting faxes from his agent, and we're corresponding with Harper's Magazine because he's placing a piece. And that was all part of what we were allowed to do as students. So I think, I'm not sure what's available now in 2024 and 2025 at WashU, but working with a professor who's working on a book, and there are many, finding that person and just being alongside them and assisting them, I think is certainly set me on my way.
Thank you. I'm sorry, did you have a quick response to that? We kind of need to wrap up a little bit here.
Yep, sure. I would just say for entering the literary world, the current game is set up that you push everything through Submittable and you hope to get something placed in a journal. And that is very, very difficult. It is not very productive. Being part of a literary community in any way that you can, whether it's writing for a student paper, whether it's working in the library or in a writer's center, is absolutely essential. It's a very small world, and people have to know people who connect you to other people. And I wish it weren't that way. I wish it were more open, but the relationships absolutely matter. Nothing is more important to an editor than the craft on the page, period. Don't try to be trendy, try to be true. That's all I can say about that.
Yes. I want to mention comparative literature, which teaches courses in writing. One of our teachers sitting there, Matthias Göritz. And also, every semester presents the products of these seminars to a wider public. So that is absolutely a place where one could go and get involved in not only in doing it, but also in then making the connection with the various writers that are associated with comparative literature and thought now as the department. But that is a really, really rich and important resource.
Thank you for the question and the great responses. And let's give our panelists a round of applause here.
Thank you to our panel. We're going to take like a 10-minute break. We'll start at 4:15. Again, we have a goodie table here for takeaways. We also have parking vouchers. Anyone who parked in the parking garage and need one of those, be sure to pick one up. Restrooms are back there, and we'll see you back here about 4:15. Hey, everybody, let's maybe make our way back to our seats and we'll get started in a minute.
Oh, maybe not. I didn't look. So what's the first question again? Don't tell me. I'm gonna wait. What is it? Okay. That'll be a short answer. It was Hawks, I thought. And then you could go to the. Sure. Yeah. And I like that one that I remember when I was playing about all these different writers and how that's a unique. I do that one early, I guess.
Folks, hi. All right, maybe take seats. We're going to get going on the second part of the program. Hello. Yeah, there we go. So I'm Martin Riker. I am a professor in the English department here at WashU, and I am the director of the department's new publishing concentration. So with the comment Michelle made in the last panel about opportunities we actually last year, we started a concentration in the English major to study publishing as part of the major, so that's there. I also wear a few other hats. I'm a novelist and a book critic, and with Professor Danielle Dutton, I co-run the feminist publishing house Dorothy Publishing Project. Prior to all of those jobs, I served for about 10 years as the associate director of Dalkey Archive Press, a nonprofit publisher some of you probably know, specializes in modern and postmodern world literature, where I had the honor of reissuing a number of books by William Gass and the pleasure of knowing him a little bit. My role today is to introduce and ask some questions of Bradford Morrow. He is the author of 12 books, winner of countless awards, founder and editor of the revered literary magazine Conjunctions, and a longtime friend and colleague of Bill Gass. We're very fortunate to have Brad here to celebrate the Gass Centennial and to talk about their friendship and the personal side of Bill's relationship to the literary culture. So I have a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll just start asking questions. Gass was a writer who saw great success throughout his career and achieved many of the signs of prestige our literary establishment offers. But he was also a writer of strong convictions and a vocal critic of the market-driven superficiality of the culture. In print, he lambasted the commercial mediocrity of the Pulitzer Prize. He compared novel plot to bird drop and horse plop, and he forcefully and at every turn defended the value of art against conventional thinking and the ideology of the market. It is not at all surprising that he would have respected and valued conjunctions and come to be friends with our speaker here, Bradford Morrow. Bradford Morrow's decision in the 1980s, the early 1980s, to launch a literary magazine was a historically important event. For from the very first issue, Conjunctions was a space where writers who worked outside of conventional and market-driven expectations could focus on their art. William Gass and many other innovative writers, among them WashU faculty Mary Jo Bang, Marshall Klemaszewski, Catherine Davis, Danielle Dutton, and myself. Conjunctions did not simply publish this work, it provided a context, a place where non-commercial writers of many types and traditions could be part of a community of sort, which is finally what a great publisher provides, a community, a context. I've always thought that this is why Conjunctions #1, which I happen to have a copy of my own, big collector's item. It's really beautiful. It's on this watercolor paper. Was a fresh shrift to James Laughlin and New Directions Publishing, because that was a worthy subject and because it announced Bradford Morrow's own aesthetic interests, but also because New Directions, as much as any publisher of its time, had done what Conjunctions was setting out to do. It had created a space in the culture for literature written with indifference to commercial values, a space that was not in the margins of corporate publishing environment, but rather was large enough and beloved enough that it could hold its own, providing a real community for writers and a real audience for readers. In Bill's work, Brad found one of the essential voices in that community that he was building. It's not surprising to me that the two became friends in all the ways that writers do. So for the format for this event, I want to ask Brad some questions, and then we'll open it up to anyone who wants to ask questions of Brad about Bill, or about Brad's own work as a novelist or as an editor. Or if you want to just share your own reminiscence of Bill in the context that we're talking about. First, however, we talked about it, and Brad's going to start by sharing an introduction that he wrote for a couple of readings Bill gave at Bard.
Well, thank you for having me. Is this on? Get a little closer? Is that better? No? Can you somehow crank it up? Is that better? Can you hear me now? Is that better? Okay, great. Yeah, I'm just looking at my notes on here. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me out here. You know, Joel and Mary and Catherine, and to be in St. Louis is just a real privilege. Writer's territory indeed, this town. Talking with Mary, oh, I forgot, yeah, boroughs too. I mean, everybody, there's so many people, it's in the water. But I'm just looking at this literally just now, and my note on here is my intro for Gass's reading at Bard, October 2nd, 2006. So right around now. Many years ago, I think Bill came to Bard. I had Bill come to Bard, I think 3 times. I'm pretty sure. And Mary came. You came once with us. Anyway, and at every occasion, the students just ate him alive. They loved William Gass. And I had a reading series that included everybody from the aforementioned Dave Wallace to, Barth came. I made them read, A Saltweed Factor, and they read the whole book. I made them promise. The tunnel hadn't been out yet, or I would have forced them through that too. But I really, the responses I got to all the various writers who would come and visit, there was nothing quite like when Bill visited. I think they really knew that they had touched language itself in some essential kind of way. But I introduced Bill on that October 2nd, 2006, just welcome Bill to Bard, and then I read, to hear him read is to use a phrase not usually applicable to writers reading their work, an event. A musical event, for Gass is clearly one of our greatest living stylists and knows how to make verbs soar and nouns spring to symphonic life, knows how to work the corners of silences and chime the alliteratives. A philosophical event, the man is, after all, a philosopher. A comedic event, as there's no one funnier, more wildly trenchant and hilarious when he gets on one of his roles. A tragic event, because Gass has never shied away from peering into the deep and crazed dislocations the human spirit suffers. A revolutionary event, because he's made it his life's work to rethink the possibilities of how a sentence can speak, how the form of a short story or novel or essay can be forged anew, and tired little words brought vibrantly back to life. An alchemical event, because as he himself has written, quote, the true alchemists do not change lead into gold, they change the world into words. I love that line. And a literary event, because of all American writers at work today, Bill Gass is one of the very few who would qualify as a true titan of letters. Every genre field he's worked in, novels, novellas, short stories, essays, translations, and even some fields that defy genre, such as his extraordinary prose poem, painting, symphonic word sculpture on Being Blue, has borne books that nourish and sustain us and will go down the generations. In his collection of essays, Finding a Form, he writes, quote, language is not the low-born, gawky servant of thought and feeling. It is need, thought, feeling, and perception itself. The shape of a sentence, the song of its syllables, the rhythm of its movements, the movement of imagination. His is an imagination and voice we are very privileged to honor this afternoon. And so we are this different October many years later. So that's how I introduced Bill. It was a great reading, of course. Those of you who have heard him read, yeah.
Whoa, I'm way louder than you. I thought we could start before we would move eventually over to talking about your work with Bill and conjunctions, but I thought we could start with talking about how you got to know Bill and how your relationship grew?
I have to think it was John Hawkes that connected us. I can't think who else it would have been. In Conjunctions 1, the first prose writer in Conjunctions 1 is Hawkes. It started with Robert Creeley, who became a lifelong friend too, and then Jack Hawkes. And I must have asked Jack, how do I get in touch with William Gass? You know, I really need to write him and tell him that I would love to publish his work, because he's at the center of so much of my thought about how prose works and the music of language and the postmodernist, not an experiment really, it's just the innovations of what Bill was doing. And so that's my guess, is that I couldn't find any letters introducing us, although some of my archives are at Brown University and some at OSU, and they sent me some scans of correspondence and things between me and Bill that ran to almost 1,000 pages. It was like 700 pages. So I went through what I could go through, and we hit it off really, really early. We hit it off, I mean, like right away. So he was in Conjunctions too. And he was the first prose writer in Conjunctions too. So it was like, in terms of prose fiction, it was a Hawkes Gass 1-2 punch. It was Uncle Bolton, The Nature of Being, was in Conjunctions too. And I really didn't know at the time that much about the tunnel. I knew it was always a kind of a mysterious entity. It was coming together. It was not quite done. It was never going to get done. It was, you know, it was like a 10th planet out there that we know about it, but, you know, we can't quite get it in focus in the telescopes and all the rest. And it was just a great mystery. But I was very, when I published it, I remember when I got the manuscript, that particular typeface of Bill's computer, which is just, nobody has ever used it before or since. I don't think they invented that. It should be renamed Gass, the gas face. I guess that doesn't sound very, it doesn't sound very commercial, but that would have made Bill happy yet again. No, and it came in, and so he and I, we met finally in New York, and the year after that, I think I was 31 and Bill was 58 or 9, so somewhere really early 30s, getting on late in his 50s, and again we hit it off. It was a rainy day. I was living on 9th Street in a floor 3 in a brownstone, where I was lucky to have wonderful, David Hockney had a studio on the first floor, believe it or not. Henry Geldzahler, who was the commissioner of New York, had the first 2 floors, and they liked having me in the building because they liked having a literary person. They had all the art they needed, you know. I remember times when there would be paintings by Basquiat drying in the hallways, and he was just unknown yet. So this building was like quite a, so Bill came over and he saw my library, and there we hit it off yet again, because we both, our book, I think of him in the present tense, look at that. We both are bibliomaniacs, essentially, and I'm sleeping in a room now at Mary's house. This is Thomas Mann, you know, the German section, then the French section is next door, and then across the hall is American literature. So he saw my apartment, which was floor-to-ceiling bookline as well, and there was yet another brotherly bond. And I interviewed him for Conjunctions 4, which I have here. And I think that afternoon, it was really, really, really drizzling in New York. It was a yucky day. And there was a show on Washington Square, an art gallery on Washington Square on the east, for an illustrated version of On Being Blue. Dieppe, was the artist's name? I have it written in here. And from there we went to my favorite place at the time, long gone, but called the Grand Ticino, which is apparently where Dylan Thomas ate his last meal, but you know, who knows? He had his last drink and ate his last meal in many places in New York. And I ran a little, at the time, a cassette recorder, because that's what we did. We had, and I ran it finally, we just ran through every tape I brought, and it just went on and on. Then kind of the fun began as editing it, because I transcribed it I share that joyful experience of transcribing gas and slowing the tape down. And, that's how we met.
You had mentioned, when we talked before, you'd mentioned that you were bibliomaniacs together.
Yeah.
And that you actually very meaningfully spent time going to bookstores and things like that.
Oh, yes.
And I'm actually sort of curious how you feel that experience is, particularly for writers together.
Oh, that's an interesting thought. Well, you're in your cathedral when you're in a bookshop, or you're in a place of worship. So like a library or a bookshop, although people like Bill and myself, acquisitives, at least in a library, you're not going to steal anything, but you can read things you can't take home with you. But in a bookshop, all the bets are off unless they ask too much money for it and you have to walk away from it. But no, we had a great time. He and I did a lot of things together, just thinking about these last few weeks. In Paris, we were up in Providence, we were in New York quite a bit, up at Bard. But also there was a reading in Columbus, Ohio, and we read at OSU. Each of us read from whatever fiction we were working on at the time, and then we gave a reading at the Thurber House in downtown Columbus, which was like an added-on event, but Bill and I were kind of the same way. What are we doing? You want to do some more? We'll do more. Okay, that's fine. I'm here with my friend. This will be great. But then they had an extra day, and so now where are the bookstores? And the librarian there, I think he wasn't the same way we were with buying books, but he took us to every bookstore. He went up and down these avenues, and I just remember scouting books with Bill. We'd show each other like, you got this? Have you seen this? Look at this. What's that all about? Do you need this, Brad? No, I've got one. It was just really a lot of fun. I remember him asking me, well, so what makes a book rare? And I said, if I haven't seen it before. It was the only thing I could come up with at the time because, there's lots of ways you can define a rare book. And if you've spent a lifetime looking at books and you haven't seen it, well, then at least that book for that moment is rare. And Bill and I were interested in dust jacket designs and typography, and we would just, and it was, I've been to bookstores with people who want to elbow you out, and that's just no fun at all. But I find when you go to a bookstore with a writer, you're looking for different things because your projects are different, what you're doing at that moment. So it becomes a kind of a real kind of harmonious, investigation of a physical space that has a lot of ideas in it, which is a bookshop.
Columbus, Ohio, it continues to be actually kind of an amazing literary city.
Yeah.
$2 Radio is now located there, which is an indie press that does amazing work and also has a bookstore and also does a book festival. And on the previous panel, the question was raised about the Midwest. And it's always struck me as the person who's not from the Midwest, but who's spent more of his years of his life in the Midwest than elsewhere, that actually, I don't know that the Midwest is more literary than the East Coast, but it's definitely differently literary. And there's a kind of way that I always felt, for instance, working at Dalkey Archive, that it belonged in Illinois because it belonged in a place that had some perspective on the publishing industry, or that had a little bit of space in which you could try things out.
I always loved that you were publishing all this abnormal stuff in Normal.
Yeah.
In Normal, Illinois.
Normal.
Yeah, Normal.
I wanted to ask you, it's really interesting to hear about how you got to know Bill through writing, through editing, and I know that you had a lot of really interesting relationships with all kinds of writers. We were talking before, you knew Creeley, you knew Gaddis, Chinua Achebe, William Burroughs. You had these long lifetime relationships with these people. And I was wondering if you could talk about how your relationship with Bill factors into that sort of constellation.
That's really interesting. Well, just taking that group right there, for instance. Chinua and Bill shared a kind of deep humanity. There's a kind of a, whether Bill liked to show it, he didn't show it off necessarily that much. It was his, like, in his heart, it's his thing. But they were both very deeply thoughtful men, deeply political, each of them too, in their different ways. And courageous men. My gosh, Achebe was a very courageous man in the Biafran War, and you know, actually after he was in the accident and he was in a wheelchair, just to go visit him at Bard and hang out with him. And we did a lot of things around too together. And to watch him in the wheelchair, just negotiate things that make many of us just discouraged beyond belief. Chinua. So they had that. Burroughs was, you know, there was nobody quite like Burroughs, but Burroughs, I think in Gas, just for instance, shared a edginess and a willingness to explore the sexual, the sensual, you know, extreme moments in human experience. Gaddis, obviously, and Gas were very close friends. I think that when I think about Gaddis and Bill's insistence that the plot is plop, Gaddis was a plotter, you know. I mean, it's interesting. Bill didn't. This was for his own work. Although I was rereading Heart of the Heart, and there's some brilliant plotting in there, and the Peterson Kid and so forth. You know, I was telling Mary this morning that these books that came out in '66, I think, Heart of the Country, and I was thinking about how close the dialogue in the Peterson Kid is to Cormac McCarthy's dialogue in Outer Dark and Orchard Keeper and Child of God, the early Appalachian ones. And I was wondering, was McCarthy actually reading Gas? Or I know that Gas was probably not reading Cormac McCarthy, but I wondered about that. And it was interesting. Bill stood out because he kind of combined elements of all these other writers who I had close friendships with. Bill was with Gaddis, it was like, from my friendship with him was very much intellectual and funny. He was like crazy, wonderfully funny, acerbic. As you put Gas and Gaddis together. There was a dinner party once that clearly was Hawks put this together because he was a Francophile. So it was at a French restaurant. And it was after an American Academy gathering. And pretty much all of postmodernism was sitting at this table. It was me, and there was Hawks, there's Gas, and there's Barth, and there's Coover, and then there's even, just for fun, William Kennedy at the end. And so we're eating this meal and so forth, and Gaddis shows up. And he said, cup of tea, gotta have a cup of tea, which was his way of saying he needed a drink. And his wife at the time didn't want him to be drinking because she didn't want him to be drinking. And so he snuck in a couple of drinks before she showed up, and then he had a cup of tea. And it was very sad, very, very sad moment. Bill knew all about this little shtick. And the friendship among all these guys was, it was collegial. There's no competitiveness in it. There's really, I'm sure there was at some point, but more of my contemporaries seem to be, well, I'm not competitive with people like Richard Powers. We've known each other for a very long time. So there's no competition. And, you know, Dave Wallace, there was no competition there. I was shattered here, but I'm not surprised when he committed suicide. So, you know, you could go to bookshops with those guys, you know, and not get in each other's way. I don't know, that's probably not an answer to your question in any way, shape, or form.
But another thing those people all had in common was conjunctions. So maybe that's a good pivot. Before I ask you about conjunctions, I wanted to read, Bill Gass wrote the foreword to the 20th anniversary issue of Conjunctions, and I put a couple sentences out of it. So this is Bill Gass's words. Conjunctions has maintained a standard of quality that is unmatched while remaining Catholic in its sense of what counts. The reason why the magazine has prospered is that it has had one greatly gifted and energetic editor throughout its lifetime. Brad has built for serious writers a raft where we can thirst and cling and curse like sailors from the shipwreck of our culture. He has taken time away from his own writing to shame all of us who are less generous. That seems erroneous, but the him being less generous part, not the you being generous. And I have never cottoned to he says, I have never cottoned to close games. Personally, I like blowouts best, and Brad has run up a big score. The way I wanted to pose my question about this was, could you talk about the role that Bill played? I mean, obviously you published him, but did he recommend writers to you? What kind of relationship
He
was that?
played a very big role early on too in my kind of my J-June formative, malleable whatever years, because I struck out doing this having exactly no idea of what I was doing. No idea at all. I knew I didn't like the journals that I was reading. I liked some of them because the prose seemed good in some, the poetry seemed good in other ones, but never the twain did meet. I could never just find it. And it seemed to me like, well, why don't I just do that for a year or two? Just get out a few issues and stake out another possibility. And then it was 5 years, and then it goes on from there. But Bill, I actually, one of the letters on Washington University, St. Louis Stationery, Department of Philosophy, he wrote me in 1984. And this is really directly an answer to your question. Dear Brad, the magazine continues to be immensely impressive and is now establishing a major reputation. Apply to the NEA. That's the next paragraph. I will be off for nearly 2 years, beginning May 1st, and I expect pieces of the tunnel to fly forth as I complete the book. 84. You will have first no on any chunk. That was, how blessed was that? I mistakenly gave a bit to Esquire. I think they are going to carve it up before they print it. Possibly they will go too far, and I will be all that dough. I will bid all that dough bye-bye, in which case you will see a section soon, Best Bill. And that's actually, I think, what they did. But I, at the time, knew what an honor it was to be seeing every first chunk of the tunnel and published it. Anything kind of Bill sent my way. I did, the editing I did with Bill, though, I would tease, occasionally misspelled words and things like that, or doubled words. It was just mechanical stuff. I found it, I've edited a lot of people where I really would get and rewrite stuff. Pretty famous writers, I get in there and help them bring it the rest of the way out. Bill didn't send me things that were just, although, again, and I'll stop reading these, but it's just so charming. Bill wrote me this one bit here, February 2003. Dear Brad, I don't even know what he was sending me. I don't have the, Dear Brad, this may be too arch, too cute, too indirect, too long. If so, just junk it. Bill. How many writers send you a cover letter like that? They're usually just like, oh, I hope you like this, and I've spent a lot of time on it. And just, if you don't like it, junk it. But yeah, no, he was, as far as sending people my way, having Bill on the masthead sent people my way just in and of itself. So he came on board on the masthead. So the masthead was Guy Davenport, William H. Gass, I think Walter Abish was on there early on too, and some others. And I think just having Gass and having a published Bill 20 times in 20 issues of Conjunctions, that's a lot. And so I think just having the Gass in your corner, and I think where he went places, he told people about Conjunctions, and if he did actually send some translations my way, to come to think of it. But yeah, no, just having his presence there.
I mean, it definitely establishes a club that a young writer like me wanted to be a member of.
Right.
You know.
Although now 2000 writers I've published, it's no longer much of a club.
It's a really big club.
It's a big, yeah.
I do want to open it up for questions and comments. One last thing I'll do before that is I just wanted to give you a chance to share any stories that I didn't ask you about that you think might be sort of interesting.
Well, I've got a lot of stories, but one that I just adore is I was teaching at Princeton one year, teaching at both the Bard and Columbia and Princeton. So I don't know what I thought I was doing, but it was like teaching in 3 places. And but I was out of Princeton, and Joyce Carol Oates, my colleague there, had invited Stephen King to come give a reading. And I thought, well, I'm going to get home late tonight, but I got to go hear Stephen King read. This will be interesting to me. And King shows up, and he said, the audience was just wonderful. Princeton kids, Princeton professors, some local audience, and then a bunch of people in motorcycle jackets, and because there was a motorcycle at the time, Stephen King, such a rock star, they would follow him around where he'd give readings, and he doesn't read that often. So from the tri-state and beyond, these motorcycle people showed up with leather jackets and, like Stephen King, man. So King got up there, and he's 7 feet tall. We were signing books once in the Viking offices. That was the first time I met him. He was across the way playing music, rock and roll music really loud, and I was trying to concentrate on signing these silly books. Anyway, we were doing this, and then we introduced him. It was I'm not short, but I was Stephen. So he's big, and he got up there, and he had a book that I recognized in his hand, and I thought, what is up with that? He said, I've got this book. It's by a writer you may never have heard of him. I hadn't heard of him before, but this is genius. So this is going to be a long reading because I'm going to read my own stuff too. And if you get bored, you can just walk out, and I will not be offended because you have other things to do, and I appreciate that. And then he said, okay, so listen to this. He said, and he read, my dad wouldn't let me have a dog. A dog we don't need. My mom made the neighbors spits her pal by poisoning it with the gin she sprinkled on the table scraps. And then he was like, isn't that amazing? He said, this is William H. Gass. I never heard of this guy before. Then he went on, he read the entire fugue. He spent the first half hour of his reading the tunnel, reading from the tunnel. And I think Bill probably sold a few books that day, maybe to the motorcycle gang guys, or, but it was then literally the very next week or the next day, for all I remember, I flew off to Paris because Bill and I were participating in Marc Chenetier was a French scholar who big on postmodernism, I'm sure you know. Sure. Anyway, he put together a panel on whatever, it was a conference of some sort with me and Coover was there and Gass and a couple other folks. And I told Bill this story and he didn't believe me. He said, no. I said, I swear to God, I can get testimony from Joyce. I mean, I promise you it was recorded, And I said, I don't know what else. He eventually believed me, but he couldn't believe it. And then when he got back home, when we both got back home, he wrote me a letter about something else. And he said in the end, he said, well, if we can't meet in New York, when we can't meet in New York, we'll always have Paris. It was his line, was one line. He said, thanks for telling me about the King's edict. So, that's one, but there's just stacks of them.
It doesn't actually surprise me. When I was working at Dalkey, we always talked about how we felt like the books that we were publishing were books that intelligent, non-overeducated readers would get better than Ivy League educated readers, right. because you're educated into a way of thinking about what literature's supposed to do. And Sorrentino, for instance, used to always had some line somewhere about how his father, who worked on the docks, was just much better at reading so-called experimental fiction,
right?
Because he didn't come to it with assumptions about what it was supposed to, the ways it was supposed to perform.
Stephen King's enthusiasm was 1,000% genuine.
Yeah.
I mean, and I guess he brought it, he thought, well, this Princeton audience, they're smarties. They'll probably, they'll have heard of this guy before.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the undergraduates necessarily had, but it was a kind of dream come true moment. If there ever is a gas a movie whatever, biodoc, whatever, we should stage that at Princeton. We can probably get Stephen King to come do it himself and get him to read from the tunnel. It was great.
So anyway, I'm sorry I've taken up so much time, but is there any questions or questions for Bradford Morrow about his relationship with Bill, about conjunctions, about his own work, about anything you want to talk about, or things that you might want to share that we haven't brought up? No?
Came from New York, you can ask me now.
Yeah, now's your chance.
Yeah.
Brad, can you point to anything in your own writing that you might be able to kind of trace back to your interactions and discussions with Bill?
Yep, I can.
Would you share that?
No, yeah, I will. Yeah, Bill Gass is a dangerous person to read if you're a young writer. I found that to be the case. And because you find, it's like Shakespeare's a dangerous writer to read. Joyce is dangerous, the best are dangerous. Some just don't rub off at you, like Nabokov never threatened me. I love Nabokov's prose, but I didn't find myself in some way subconsciously writing like Nabokov. Bill, on the other hand, I grew up as a musician. I wanted to be a musician, so I'm a pianist and a professional musician for a while. And, I know music inside and out. So when I read language, I'm reading music too. And that's something Bill and I very much shared. And that's probably my musical knowledge is what availed Bill's work to me at a deeper level. But so when I was working on my first novel, Come Sunday, there's a tornado in that book that is an homage to gas. I don't know that I've ever said it in front of an audience before. I think I might have told Bill once. Maybe I didn't. But it was, I thought, one and done here, because it's about 4 pages of this tornado carrying this girl up into the air and so forth. And it has that musicality, it has the alliteratives, it has my sense of what that was all about. But yeah, sometimes writing a nonfiction, I had to be very careful about not getting overly alliterative, and because it's hard to do what Bill did. It's very hard to do, and it's not something you can attempt to do it. And I wasn't trying to copy or ape Bill at all. He just had infected me. He was a virus. Like William Burroughs, said language is a virus from outer space. Did you know that he really believed that too? And there's some truth, that maybe not from outer space. Well, though I guess we are from outer space in some sense. But yeah, I think that reading Bill, you have to kind of do something else. Read the newspaper for a while, or read something else, because Bill is so powerful. Shakespeare, iambic pentameter and interior rhymes, and God, when I was reading Dante in the original, I was learning Italian. Man, what a confused dreams I used to have, and my mind was all mixed up because of Terza Rima and all the rest of that. You know how it is. Now I have my own style so much for so many decades that it's not a concern. But every so often I'll say, oh, that's a little Bill Gassy right there, and I'll either leave it or I'll take it out, because it can't be too much, because nobody can do gas but the man himself. But like jazz musicians, they'll do a little imitation, a little homage to each other. Painters do it and so forth, so why not writers too? But I think really the larger answer to that question would be the seriousness of the endeavor, engaging in what you're going to write about, and really, really committing, you're being really, really committed, compelled, I think is the word Bill used, being very committed to what you're doing. So I definitely learned that from Bill. And having fun too. You know, it doesn't have to be a beetle-browed disaster every time you sit down at the table. It can loosen up, you can have some fun, and Bill encourages that too. Reading him can be like aerobics. There was an earlier question about submitting to literary journals and getting a start in the literary life and so forth. And I just like my 2 cents worth, since I deal in the middle of this all the time. I'm just now finishing up Conjunctions 83. So much for doing a few issues and getting out. And we get submittable. This new issue is co-edited by me and Joyce Carol Oates, and it's on ghosts. So it's ghost stories from around the world. And we got 1,800 submissions on submittable, and we still do it the old school way with paper submissions, essays, things like that. That's like foreign language to some young writers. So it's like, well, there's like 2,500 submissions, we'll say. And I'm always, you know, I have 15 people reading with me. We're always impressed if you know who you're sending your submission to. If you're just spending your $2 or $1 or $3, whatever the journal charges you, and hitting like the send button to every journal you have contact with on submittable, you're probably going to collect way more rejections for that than you would need to suffer through if you had done your due diligence and research what journal is going to be interested in my work. And by the other token, what journal interests me? You know, where do I actually want to appear? Not just being in print is like, you can be in print. Just go steal a bike and you'll be in the local paper. Or, you know, it's easy to get in print, in other words. It's not so hard. But I think it's really important to, and also if you show, like, I really liked that piece by Danielle Dutton in your recent issue. Then I sit up. I said, well, I like that piece too. I said, well, who are you again? That sort of thing. You don't really have to know people. I don't think it's one of those. In fact, people try to get in where they know somebody. Believe it or not, and this is the truth. Oh, this is being recorded. I'm disinclined to, I'll look at it, and then my disinclination is something I can overrule quite easily if it's just wonderful stuff. But you know, I mean, it's hard to be a writer. It's hard to write a bad piece. It's very hard to write a bad piece of fiction or a bad poem. It's just hard work. And then to want to be a writer and send it out there and get your work out into the world, that's beyond hard. It's just that you're exposing your soul, you know, or whatever we got. You're exposing yourself in a way that can be very embarrassing. And you're no longer just showing it to your girlfriend or your husband or, you know, your best pal. You're opening it up to others, and the others are generally can be very critical because they are very competitive. So, you know, I think nothing wrong with submittable. I just think it has to do with, I think cover letters are very important. Mm-hmm. Showing some recognition that it's hard to be a literary journal, really hard. Oh my God, you know, I have to go out and find a new publisher now. Bard College is, you know, letting Conjunctions go this spring, and for whatever reasons, you know, they wanted to let us go a few years ago, and then there was such a public outcry that they gave us another 3 years, you know, bless them. And, you know, not every liberal arts college can say we published a journal for 33 years, because we're not a commercially successful enterprise at all, never would be. But, you know, it's like doing a literary journal is like a very hard hike, you know, which Bill would know the answer to this, but the French philosopher said, walking is just a series of recovered falls. Gass would know that right away. He said, oh, that's, I can't remember right now, but being a writer, but also being a literary journal editor or publishing, it's a series of recovered falls and neither path is easy, but we just do it because we're obsessed, we're compelled, we need to, we have to. The blank piece of paper that Bill, we talked about earlier.
I mean, I think your advice regarding submissions speaks to what I had to say about conjunctions in my little introduction, which is precisely that conjunctions created this sort of space in the culture. And I think probably what you've been drawn to is people who, for legitimate reasons, want to be a part of that space, who want to be part of that community. And I think that it is easy for people who haven't been on the publisher side of things to not understand how much that sense of community means to the people on this side of things, on the publishing side. Yeah. Anyway, I think, is there any other questions? Or? Oh, okay, we have one more, okay. I mean, I think that's probably a question for someone in this room. Does anybody know about the project? Can I share the mic? This is Mary.
Yeah. Some of that has been partially published in journals, one online journal and one print, and it's yet to be published, but it is complete. It's complete.
Conference paper on the manuscript Mary shared with me. I did a conference paper on that manuscript Mary generously shared with me. So if you go to tedmorsey.blog, you can find at least a description of the manuscript and kind of what it contains and so forth. So it's not published, but I did try to provide some understanding of what he was up to. And of course, it was wonderful. So thank you yet again, Mary, for sharing that manuscript with me.
Any other questions? All right, I think we should probably wrap up. Brad, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, everyone, and join us in Olin Library for reception and an exhibition viewing. See you over there.